My uncle, my master, the story of my great grandfather. My story begins in 1820, the same year as the Missouri Compromise, when America had to decide to be slave or free. At least this year, 1820, is the earliest recorded history I can find on my family. I am a product of Osborne Harris, my great grandfather. Osborne was born a slave in 1820 on the Thomas Whitmore Harris plantation in Littleton, North Carolina. Yes, that's how I got my name, a slave name. I was named after my master's family. So for years and possibly generations, we do not know for sure, but we know that Osborne and his family toiled in the hot sun day after day, year after year, decade after decade, and yes, for generations they worked for free on the Harris plantation. Although I do not know anything about Osborne's mother, it was obviously she was a slave too. Maybe her mother was a slave and her mother's mother, or maybe she was made the horrific journey across the Atlantic Ocean as a new slave, freshly plucked from her family in Africa. I may never know the true story because, for obvious reasons, most of these records were destroyed or somehow they mysteriously disappeared. However, my great grandfather, Osborne Harris, was no ordinary slave. I always knew I was different. I always wondered, how did my skin get so light and why do some of my aunts have blonde hair? How can I be this light skinned if my ancestors were slaves directly imported like they were cattle from Africa? Crazy as it sounds, Osborne was born to the slave owner's brother. Yes, that's right. Somewhere out there is a white family with the same DNA as me. Just imagine all the pain and suffering, being brutalized and tortured and treated worse than an animal, and all this is done by your own blood, your own family. How sad Osborne must have been. And all that time you peer into the window of the big house, and there you see your father comfortably having dinner with his family while you wait outside hoping to get some scraps of food. Since there were laws preventing any kind of interracial mixing, it is obvious that Osborne's mother must have been raped. Sometimes I wonder how she felt after having baby Osborne, joy and sadness all in the same breath. Despite his situation, Osborne had to endure in silence and persevere over the years through all the pain, both physically and emotionally. For if he did not endure and gave up and quit, I would not be here today. Thank you, Osborne, for not giving up. To this day, I can feel Osborne's pain. The pain was multiplied because he was half white and half black. Too dark to live in the big house and ostracized by his fellow slaves because he was too light. Oh, Osborne, how I know your plight. I wish I knew you back then. I used to hate history class when they would ask me, "Where are your people from?" I didn't know. So this question confounded me and filled me with low self esteem. Am I a slave or am I a king? Oh, I wish I knew about you, Osborne, back then, because instead of shame, I would have been proud and boldly enveloped myself in Osborne's legacy. As a product of his master's brother, Osborne was unfortunately thrust into an overseer position. By default, Osborne became the leader of the Harris plantation. Sometimes when I think about it, it sounds crazy. My aunts, my uncles, their grandfather born into slavery. So Osborne and his children toiled day and night to make his master and ultimately all of America very wealthy. In reality, he was fulfilling his master's dreams while his dreams were placed on the side. Yes, I said America became wealthy because of hundreds of years of not only free labor, but free high quality labors. You see, slaves did things that no one else could do. But I am grateful that Osborne and his family endured for generations to help make America great. It is my family legacy that fills me with pride. The Harris family helped build this country beginning in 1820. But it was by the grace of God. Maybe it was a spiritual awakening, but anyway, Osborne was in his mid 40s when America became engaged in a civil war to end slavery. North versus South, free versus slave. This was Osborne's big opportunity. As a true Harris would, Osborne fought for his freedom. Of course, he sided with the Union Army. Osborne is the first true American hero in my family tree. He is the beginning of our family legacy. But on a sad note, Osborne lost his wife before the end of the Civil War. Unfortunately, she never got to know the feeling of being free. She lived and she died in captivity. I tear up sometimes when I try to imagine what her life was like. Poor Osborne was left alone to care for his children on the Harris plantation. But Osborne was multi-talented, and when the war was over, he hoped to finally get a chance to put his talents to use and fulfill his dreams and not fulfill the dreams of others. Due to his blood relationship with his master Osborne, he was given more opportunities than others and found himself fairly educated despite it being illegal to educate slaves in the South. Slaves were smart. You see, they would watch the white people and they would learn on their own just by observation. So when the Civil War was finally over and Osborne, the single dad, and his children were set free, since he was his master's nephew, I don't know if it was pity, love, or the fear of God, but Master Thomas Whitnall Harris gave Osborne some money to start a new life, and he used it to purchase land on the Harris plantation. To this day, these descendants of Osborne still live on the same piece of land in Littleton, North Carolina, proud to be the descendants of slaves. But what about me? Where does my story fit in? Despite all the racism, the hate, and the bigotry that permeated the South in the 1800s and undoubtedly negatively affected my family, despite all the horrific events going on, lynching, burning churches, and outright oppression, despite all of this, I would like to believe that in the darkest night, a light will shine, and it shined brightly on Osborne Harris. So shine on did that light as Osborne and his children finally, after generations of captivity, they were set free. What a great day this must have been. How happy all of my family must have been. As a child, these stories made me sad and angry. But now I have come to see what my family had to go through just so I could be free, just so I could be me, a product of slavery. So here is where I can now find myself. You see, Osborne got remarried after the Civil War. He married a well-educated and light-skinned woman just like him. She was the principal at the local black school. Just like Osborne, she, due to her fair skin, was most likely the product of rape. So we have two newly freed slaves, both the product of rape, coming together. This is where my story begins. So Osborne and his new wife had a new set of children, all born in the late 1800s. Osborne had a family born in slavery, and now he had a family that was born free. One of Osborne's free children, William Harris, is my grandfather. Yes, my father's father was the son of a slave. It bothers me when people say it was so long ago that it doesn't matter anymore. Tell that to my father, who is alive and well today. But because slavery was over, the hatred and animosity did not end. The lynchings, the cross burnings, the sleepless nights, this did not end. Things still were not right. Needless to say, this hatred toward freed slaves would continue without any legal recourse, without any justice, without any mercy for the next 100 years. So the light that shined on Osborne during these dark nights, he shined it on his children. Having built himself up as a businessman, Osborne was in position to help his children. To each of them, he gave 10 acres of land in hopes that they would start their own families and begin new and prosperous careers. But his kids born into freedom were not like their father. The product of the slave wife all stayed on their land, where they still reside today. But the products of the free wife, well, they had enough of the South and all the hatred. They yearned to be truly free. So the Osbornes dismay. See, Osborne, he wanted them to stay. So, to his dismay, the free children all sold their 10 acres and moved up north. Some landed in Maryland, and others found their way to New Jersey, where we reside today. My grandfather, William, and all my aunts and uncles moved up north to experience equality and to have opportunities that would not be available to black people in the South. They made a very wise decision. However, the move up north was not so easy for my grandfather. Before he could leave North Carolina, he was arrested and placed on the chain gang as his brothers and sisters had to leave up north without him. Pop, as he was known by my aunts and uncles, was always talked about, but I never knew him. I heard these stories about the chain gang and coming up north, but I was just a kid. These were just stories back then. Now, it's my legacy. So when my grandfather, William, somehow we do not know for sure, was set free from the chain gang, he made his way to New Jersey, and in 1936, as Hitler was on the rise, my father, Jesse Harris, was born. The most ironic part about my grandfather being on the chain gang is that he was arrested for impersonating a white man. That was his crime. Trying to enjoy some of the simple day-to-day amenities that were not afforded to black people. That was his crime. My great-grandfather lived through the Civil War. My grandfather endured segregation. My father was born when America was on the cusp of World War II, and I was born in 1966. Anyone knows anything about American history knows that 1966 was not a good time for black people. It is like generation after generation. My family has been thrust into tough situations with all odds against my family. Slavery, civil war, segregation, chain gangs. Our family legacy, our family destiny was all on the line. But we persevered. For generations against the odds, the Harris family succeeded. So we say today, thank you, Osborne Harris, for never giving up. And thank you for letting your light shine in these dark, dark nights. The story is by Stacey Harris, thanking my great-grandfather.